Being able to deconstruct things like walls, windows, and doors can be a vital skill for engineers and syndicate agents, so this is kind of a two-in-one guide. Plus, I've actually never made a guide on something that seems simple to me but may not be simple to a new player, so we'll go back to the basics. To deconstruct anything, or see if you can even deconstruct anything, you can right-click on it, hover over it, and if you see the Begin Deconstructing menu, that means that can be deconstructed. Then you just shift-click the wall or whatever object, and it'll give you instructions in blue. You don't actually need to right-click anything to begin deconstructing if you just know the steps already. In order to disassemble things properly, you're gonna, especially if it takes a welder, you're gonna usually want something like engineering goggles for eye protection, a welding mask, things that protect your eyes, but those two are the most common, engineering goggles or welding masks. Engineers will have no issues getting a hold of this stuff. Syndicate agents also really have no issues getting a hold of these items. For basic wall and window deconstruction, you do not need any form of insulated gloves or shock protection. For a normal wall, they're one of the easiest objects in the game to deconstruct. You could use something like a normal welding tool, which you'll find access to relatively easily. However, this process can take some time with just a normal welding tool. Currently, the only welding tool in the game that is actually a straight upgrade is the Advanced Industrial Welding Tool. Not only does this have 2.5 times more fuel, it actually deconstructs objects 30% faster, saving you a lot of time. There's not even anything that a syndicate can get a hold of that will help you deconstruct things this fast. Getting a hold of these tools is not always easy, and the normal welding tool will certainly do its job, but if you can see this welding tool, it's actually faster at deconstructing walls than even the experimental welding tool. The experimental welding tool obviously has infinite fuel, but it does not have the speed upgrade that the industrial welding tool has, interestingly. Once you deconstruct the first part of the wall, it becomes a girder, which at this point you can unanchor it and screwdriver it to get rid of it, or girders, once unanchored, can be picked up and dragged with control left click, and this will just let you walk through it. You can control right click to push it around, and you can even move it into a different spot, for example, anchor it, and replace the steel. So you could use this to cover your tracks that you deconstructed through a wall. You can use this to move a girder, move a wall, whatever the case may be. Normal walls are very simple. Deconstructing unreinforced windows is also very simple. To start, you use this as a screwdriver. Power drills are a wrench and screwdriver all in one, and actually works 50% faster than a normal screwdriver. So if you get your hands on a power drill, this is significantly better. Plus, power drills can be, again, as I said, mentioned, can be swapped to a wrench by pressing Z, and it'll tell you at the bottom if it's either anchoring or screwing, and you'll see the model change from, well, a wider socket to a screw socket. Anyways, you just screwdriver a normal window, and this applies for all unreinforced windows. You just screwdriver it and wrench it. So actually, if you have a power drill, you could do it with one hand like on your tool without even having to swap tools. So it can be very fast and very easy to get rid of one of these unreinforced windows, and that is one of the primary reasons actually to use reinforced windows. Not necessarily that they're tankier, that deconstructing them just takes way longer and more work. Deconstructing unreinforced directional windows is the same exact step. Just use a screwdriver and a wrench and it'll be gone. Reinforced windows are a bit different and require welding protection as well as a crowbar. To deconstruct a reinforced window, first you must weld it, so you're going to want welding protection. Again, if you can get your hands on the Advanced Industrial Welder, you'll save some time here. Do not throw away your welder or anything, you'll still need it. Then we can use a screwdriver, a crowbar. So there's the normal crowbar, there is a Jaws of Life, which pries faster, and then a Syndicate Jaws of Life, which pries with an even higher modifier. So if you're a Syndicate agent, not only is a Jaws of Life a crowbar, it's also a wirecutter, and just like the power drill, you can press Z to swap between the modes. So a Syndicate Jaws of Life will pry things much faster than even a normal Jaws of Life, and it's pretty apparent. So once you crowbar it, you have to then go back to your welder, and I would recommend that you turn off the flame while deconstructing. Most of your fuel cost comes from the successful action, but it's easy to forget to turn it off and then not have fuel when you need it. Finally, like every other window, it finishes off with a screwdriver and a wrench use. And you could smash these windows probably faster with something like a baseball bat, but that's louder and does break the glass. So especially if you're an engineer, you don't want to be doing that. You could weld the shard glasses back. Anyways, this is a deconstruction video, not a general advice video. Interestingly, reinforced directional windows actually don't require any form of welder, so you just screwdriver, crowbar, and then screwdriver and wrench. So the ending results for all the windows is the same with the screwdriver and wrench, but even though they're of the same reinforced variety, you for some reason don't actually have to weld the directional reinforced window even though it's made out of the same material. So that might also be something worth considering when making windows in secure areas, that directional windows can be deconstructed faster. They're also just not as tanky. So just keep that in mind when making that. They are made out of less materials, so it's really about trade-offs. Shuttle windows are also a little bit different. First, you start off with a welder, and then just like the reinforced window, you follow every step. So welder, screwdriver, crowbar, welder again, and screwdriver. But instead of just wrenching it to finish it, you actually have to crowbar it again. And then a third welder, so a ton of fuel has to get used on this. So if you're using a normal welder, you're going to be in trouble. And then finally you hit it off with the wrench. So there's an extra welding phase before or after the screwdriver. So if you're trying to really make an area secure, you should try to consider making shuttle windows if you still want to see through. It's a little weird to me that shuttle windows are just better than like reinforced like uranium windows in that regard, because they just take more effort to deconstruct. I feel like shuttle windows, like, yeah, they should be strong because they're for shuttles, but better than just a space station's windows? I don't know. Anyways, off topic. To start off deconstructing a reinforced wall, use a wire cutter, then a screwdriver, welder. But interestingly, unlike shuttle windows, you only have to use a welder twice throughout the entire process. So after the welder, you use a crowbar, a wrench, a final welder. So again, reinforced walls, especially if you're a syndicate agent where speed matters for deconstruction, I would highly recommend you try to get access to these better tools if you can, because you will be able to get through walls faster, especially if you're trying to deconstruct something like the armory. After the welder, use a crowbar, by the way, then a screwdriver, wire cutters, and then finally, you could keep deconstructing the girder, but you just unanchor it at this point, and even a reinforced girder can be dragged around. So yeah, as mentioned, speed is really important for deconstructing things like reinforced walls if you're an antagonist. So the only real way to do that faster without blowing it up is having the better tools, which I would try to get access to. The Syndicate Jaws of Life is easy to get access to, but as far as I'm aware, there's no real easy way of getting these industrial advanced welders. But you can find them in maintenance lockers. Sometimes engineering has them mapped. I know you could definitely find them while salvaging, so those departments will have an easier time getting the advanced tools. Science can print out Jaws of Life and power drills, but again, unless there's something I'm just missing, I don't think they can make advanced industrial welding tools, even though they can make experimental ones, so maybe it should be part of the research. Maybe it should just remain a rare upgrade. I don't know. So to deconstruct a door, you're going to actually need hacking tools. You're going to need a wire cutter and a screwdriver, as well as normal deconstruction tools. So first, you're going to want a screwdriver it open. You also need flash protection because, or welding protection, because you have to weld the door after this. Once you do that, it'll tell you that all of its wires must be cut. And that means you have to cut all of the wires except the bolt wires. So unless you know the wires, you're also going to want to have a multi-tool on you, because I'm just going to snip down the line to show you what this means. So yeah, snip the bolt wire. So now I can't, if I were to snip all the wires, it will tell you first unbolt the airlock. So since I snipped them all in a line, I actually snipped the bolt wire and the power line. So you need to restore a power line, and then you unpulse the bolt wire, then snip every wire except the bolt until last. And then once you do it in that order, you will be able to pry it. So basically, cut every wire until you know which one's the bolt wire, then either restore power if you lost power, pulse the bolt wire, and then snip everything last, or snip everything and then snip the bolt wire last. A little confusing. That's why deconstructing doors is normally not done. People normally just hack them, but sometimes you need to get rid of a door. Then you just crowbar it, which again, you're really going to want a Jaws of Life. Even with a Syndicate Jaws of Life, it takes a few moments. And then you'll have an airlock assembly. Interestingly, you actually can just unanchor the airlock assembly, and you'll rip out the door electronics at this point, so you could just drag your way through. But in this case, if you want to keep deconstructing it, you need a pair of wire cutters, so Jaws of Life really coming in handy here. You will cut a wire out of it, and then you must unanchor it now, which is interesting that you don't have to cut the wires first. And finally, you weld it to get rid of the final assembly part, and it'll turn back into steel. So depending on if you just want to make sure a door never works on again, you could just leave it in the assembly, or if you're trying to remove it, which is probably more likely the case. Syndicate agents usually aren't deconstructing doors, they're just hacking them open. Either way, that is how you do that. Windoors work pretty much the same exact way. you have to cut all of its wires, but you don't actually weld it. So you could take some time to figure out which is the bolt wire on Windoor specifically before doing this. So I just pulsed the bolt door off. Then, like before, you snip every wire that's not the bolt wire. And then finally snip the bolt wire, and it'll tell you that now you can move on to a wrench. And that will actually let you open up the door directly. But again, if you already hacked it, you wouldn't have to deconstruct at this point. Then you could use a pair of wire cutters to rip the LVs out. I think you actually can just unanchor it before that too, because it's the same as a normal door. You unanchor it, and then finally with a screwdriver, so it's not quite the same as a normal door. That actually just turns into a normal Windoor assembly because I picked a plasma one. So there's, again, more inconsistency with how doors are deconstructed, because you don't do that with like walls or anything. Then you have to anchor it again and finally weld it. So again, I feel like deconstructing these is just really inconvenient because there's just so many steps, especially for syndicate agents. Really, the only time you're going to be deconstructing these again is as an engineer. Something worth mentioning, you can actually just RCD deconstruct Windoors and airlocks. So especially if you're an engineer, using your RCD on something like this is probably just significantly faster and easier than doing all the manual labor of it. As a syndicate agent, you're probably also would be better off trying to steal one of these if you're really hoping to deconstruct or just blow it up. It takes so much time to deconstruct doors where you'd be better off just hacking them or just like emagging it or whatever, door authenticator. But that's really it for deconstruction. Doors and windows are more complicated. Everything else, you could just follow the steps exactly, try to get upgraded tools, and hopefully this wasn't too lengthy, but should explain the process as adept as it could possibly go. Thank you for watching.